Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Chip Talks. Today, we're going to talk about food addictions. Some of you guys might not like this one very much, so this one's going to get a little personal and up close. We all will be able to relate to some of the things that we talk about today. The biggest thing that I always want to communicate to you guys is, the purpose of these Chip Talks is to better inform you about how you work and then give you different strategies as to how to basically overcome difficulties that we have with our diet or in our environment. Oh, and by the way, we're very happy we have a sponsor now. It's Neighborhood Nutrition and Clinic. So if you're in the Ada area, Neighborhood Nutrition is getting ready to open. It will open soon. They will offer clinic service, so clinical type services, and they will also offer nutritional type services. And we have some personal interest in that, so that'll be kind of fun. But anyway, Neighborhood Nutrition is sponsoring this show because this show is really about nutrition. It all boils down really to what we put in our mouth. It certainly has something to do with our environment. So if you're in Alaska, you're going to be a little bit different than if you're in Africa. And if you're exposed to a bunch of heavy metals, they're probably dumping on us from the sky as opposed to not. Those are different circumstances. So we respond and adapt as individuals, as organisms, to our diet and environment. That's just the way that it is. I'll go ahead and turn on the webcam here so you guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can now see me. If you're listening at home, you're probably better off not being able to see me. But anyway, we're going to talk about food addiction today. So I'm excited about this one, and we're going to get into some really cool stuff. So I think the discussion always, should start with, well, what do we need to eat? Right? So we don't know if we have any kind of food addiction if we don't even know what we need to eat. And I'll tell you right now, and again, we'll always be talking about these facts, this knowledge, because this is just part of everything that I talk about. So this will be reinforced 100,000 times over. But if you really boil down what you need to eat, it's not that much. We all think we need to eat meat, right? Well, what is meat? Meat is just saturated fat and amino acids bound together. So again, fats we definitely have to eat, but the point is meat is just saturated fat and amino acids, and your body will build all the amino acids it needs to build. Protein, again, we think of as meat. Again, that's just amino acids and fat. So there's a lot of things. Carbohydrates, we somewhat do need to eat, and we'll talk about that in a second. Fruits, and vegetables are carbohydrates. The thing that we don't need to eat any of, that we eat a lot of, is dietary sugars. We don't really need grains and like flour and things like that. Those are more fills, so calories, but kind of not real nutritious calories. So what we really, 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 really have to eat are dietary fats. And the dietary fats, these aren't things that you find at McDonald's, right? So it's not, you go through the McDonald's drive-thru and you get a French fry and you think, oh, I'm getting my dietary fats. No, you're not. Those are trans fats. McDonald's does use some good fats, but again, they heat them up and that destroys everything good about them. So those are trans fats usually. And usually fried foods, the oils that are kind of involved in fried foods are not the best for us. Most of the fats that we need, and again, you can think of them as oils, you can think of them as lipids, but most of the fats that we need don't do well at really high temperatures and kind of can get oxygenated when they're in the presence of oxygen. So they can turn brown, and that's why oils get rancid, is because they basically have been oxygenated. So we need saturated fat, mono-unsaturated fat, and poly-unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fat comes from meat, again, but when you eat protein from meat, you're kind of eating a bunch of amino acids that cow or pig or chicken thought that it needed, not necessarily the amino acids that you need, but those are useful, so you'll certainly break down those amino acids and use them. But dietary fats are, it, right? So saturated fat, and again, that comes from meat. It also comes from butter, bacon, things like that. So saturated fat is super important. Cacao, actually. So if you eat chocolate and you make sure that chocolate comes from a cacao bean, cacao has almost it has all, interestingly, of the saturated fats in it, which is nice. There's not many things that do that. And again, the cures here are always in nature, but saturated fat is the first type of fat that we need to eat. And then mono-unsaturated fat is the second type. So olive oil, oleic acid in olive oil is a mono-unsaturated fat, and that's why olive oil is so good for you. Incidentally, they limit the amount of oleic acid in olive oil. Now, why the F do they do that? Again, it's very, very good for you. It's not going to hurt you, and they limit it to 15% in extra virgin olive oil. Why does extra virgin olive oil cost more than olive oil? It shouldn't. It's less processed. It's got more goodies in it. So again, they wanted to. Oleic acid is a magic secret. So just, remember that down the road. But mono-unsaturated fat, super important. Oleic acid, super important. And oleic you'll find in cashews. You find in a lot of nuts, almonds. Most nuts are higher in mono-unsaturated fat than they are saturated, which is great. That means that they have a tendency to be more anti-inflammatory than they do inflammatory. The last two types of fats that we need are omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. These are essential fatty acids. That means that our bodies cannot make them. They have to come to us from our diet. Now, all these fats that I'm talking about are super important, and your body reacts to these fats, but the essential ones we should pay even more attention to. And omega-6s, if you're just the average Joe, I wouldn't worry too much about that in our diet. We get lots of omega-6s from corn, and we get lots of omega-6s just in our diet right now. In fact, we get just an abundance of omega-6s. We hardly get any omega-3s, though. And omega-3s would be the thing that I would, encourage you to be concerned with, and begin to augment your diet with omega-3s. And it doesn't really matter your state of health. You can be healthy as a horse. This is going to help you. You can be sick, and this will help you as well. But up the amount of omega-3s. So when we look at fats, we should eat about the same amount. Whoops, there's my hand. We should eat the same amount of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So about a 1:1 to 1:4 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. Not more than a 1:4, and we're about 1:20 now. But those fats should be about 20% of our diet. And then 80% of our diet should be a combination of mono-unsaturated and saturated fat. And again, we need those in balance, and you probably should have a little bit more mono-unsaturated than saturated. So that's king to our body. Your body has to have those types of fats. Again, it's got to have omega-3 and omega-6. Saturated you reclaim, mono-unsaturated you kind of reclaim. But those are the most important things in our diet. And your body reacts to basically those inputs and how much of those inputs you have and in what ratios. So we react, and that's a very important thing. How do we react to our fat intake? Well, we build a microbiome. So we'll build a biome that is responsible for maintaining bacteria. The responsibility of that bacteria is to provide offsets dietary nutrients that we're not getting in our diet. Bacteria make proteins, and proteins are just, broken down fats. So, bacteria produce fatty acids and produce basically proteins that we would break down from the fats that we consume in our diet. So they offset, which is really cool. So like if you're not eating enough, let's say, saturated fat, there are bacteria that would potentially develop in your biome that would produce all the chemical mediators that you would need that you would break down from saturated fat. So this is really cool, but we need to understand that it's a reaction. So these little bugs that we allow to grow in us, they are reacting to our lack of dietary inputs, fat in particular. Now, if I want to really break your machine or stress out your machine as much as I possibly can, What I'm gonna want to do is feed you just one side of the equation as to fats. So either feed you all anti-inflammatories or feed you all inflammatories. And guess what is, again, being done to us is kind of the way that I think about it. But, it's certainly, we're doing it to ourselves. What is presented to us in our diet is a lot of saturated fat and a lot of omega-6 fat. And these are the inflammatory fatty acids. So literally, we're presented with the worst thing that can possibly happen to us, except no dietary fats. And as a result of this, we have to build a whopping microbiome, a very diverse microbiome to offset all the anti-inflammatories that we can't build because we're not getting the fats to build them from. So in a normal, let's say, Western human, you have, inputs of saturated fat and omega-6 and very little mono-unsaturated and very little omega-3, which results in a giant biome that produces a bunch of anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids so that westernized human can survive and run an immune system. So that's where most of us are at. So I think that's a pretty good amount of background. But I want to give you guys a sense of the amount of bacteria that we all have inside of us. Because, again, Google, what is the cause of disease? Pathogens. Google, where do pathogens come from? Dysregulated bacteria. Now, I'll just tell, you could take this for what it's worth, but in my research, almost every single disease state that I've studied can be traced back to a bacteria. What is inflammation? We say this word all the time. Oh, inflammation. Well, we all know, you rub poison ivy on yourself or something that you're allergic to, you will inflame, so you get red, itchy patches. Now, the thing that I want you to understand about inflammation, though, is it takes a stimulus. So you have to have something that creates the inflammation. It doesn't just magically happen, and it doesn't just magically happen because of the foods that we eat. So we hear all the time that, oh, that's an inflammatory food. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean when we eat that food that we're going to inflame? No, it doesn't, although they want you to think that. What it means is that you have bacteria inside of you. Okay? You have bacteria inside of you right now. And that bacteria may be dysregulated and causing you issues. And some of those issues will be inflammation. Bacteria cause inflammation. Allergies cause inflammation. Viruses cause inflammation. It takes a stimulus to cause inflammation, and that stimulus, unless you're allergic to food, generally is not food. It's generally bacteria if it's inside of us. All right, sorry for that little sidebar, but I think that was important. So now let's kind of get into the meat of things, and we're going to talk about addiction to food. And this is going to be uncomfortable, I know, for some of you guys. But we're just going to walk this through, okay? So I'm going to take you down a little journey. If you're watching on YouTube or you're watching kind of the video portions of this, I'm going to use some web pages, I guess, to describe what I'm talking about, but I'll adequately describe what I'm talking about if you're listening at home. So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is a mouse-cat relationship, and it has to do with a bacteria called Toxoplasma gondii. Now, I want to run you guys through this because, again, it's hard for us to believe sometimes that bacteria could control our mind or could control our behavior. But I want to start with a very hard example of exactly that, of exactly how bacteria will control the behavior of a cat. A bacteria will control the behavior of a mouse and cause that mouse to be less sensitive, let's say, to the cat, and cause it to be more likely to be eaten. So I want to talk to you about a bacteria called Toxoplasma gondii. Now, Toxoplasma gondii infects humans too, and it's not so good for us, but Toxoplasma gondii is kind of a mouse-cat bacteria. And it has its last stages in a mouse, and as it's dying, well, we'll talk about a cat first. So a cat will eat a mouse that has Toxoplasma gondii in it. Toxoplasma gondii will infect the cat and infect the cat's gut and infect the cat. Basically, the cat will end up pooping out the larva stages of Toxoplasma gondii. Mice, all mammals eat each other's poop. Yeah, sorry, it's gross, but they do. So mice will eat that poop and will become infected with Toxoplasma gondii. As that Toxoplasma gondii matures in that mouse, it will begin to change that mouse's sense of smell and make that mouse less sensitive to the smell of cat urine or cat. And it will also make that mouse just pretty chill and lethargic. So the mouse is very easy to catch by virtue of this, and the mouse really doesn't recognize the cat as a threat anymore by virtue of this. And again, this is beneficial to the bacteria because they have to start life in a cat. So they have to develop their larvae to a larva stage in a cat. So in this way, bacteria, Toxoplasma gondii, influence the behavior of a mouse. They completely change that mouse's brain chemistry. And if you want to research this, it's really easy. Just look at Toxoplasma gondii in a mouse. I'm looking at a Google page right now with numerous search results on it. Parasite makes mouse lose fear of cats permanently. Brain parasite may strip away rodents' fear of predators. And there's even more in-depth articles. You can go kind of as deep as you want to go there into Toxoplasma gondii. But the point is, the bacteria certainly can influence behavior and influence outcomes and manipulate the host. All right, so that's the point that I want to make for you guys. I also want to talk to you about dopamine. So what makes us feel good? Dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine and serotonin are what make our brains go. They're what make us feel good. They're what make us, if you sort of are online and you do a really cool Facebook post and someone likes your post, you get a little dopamine hit. I mean, it feels good, right? So it's a little bit of a positive push, let's say. Now, the interesting thing is that bacteria in our intestine certainly can produce dopamine. They certainly have the ability to, and it's not just showing, again, my computer screen and just a search results. It's just not enterococcus. Many different types of bacteria will output dopamine, and some will output serotonin or certainly output tryptophan, which can break down into serotonin. So our brain chemicals can be excreted by bacteria. So that's the big point there. Now, I want to talk to you about when you physically need to eat, what happens, okay? And again, our bodies can fool us into thinking that we physically need to eat before we do, let's say. So this isn't the litmus test on, whether you should eat or not, but I just want to walk you through these differences. Because we all have had that, a cookie would be good really right now, and you start thinking about it and you kind of get a little bit of a craving, and then you get the positive dopamine hits. I think you see where this is going now, and we go get that cookie. That's a little different than something called ghrelin. So when your fat tissue, when your actual body senses nutrient need, like my nutrients are being depleted, I need to restore my nutrients, then your fat tissue, you will start generating a hormone called ghrelin, and you will release ghrelin into your pituitary. Ghrelin is what gives you stomach pains, stomach cramps. And ghrelin is our physiological signal that we need to eat. Now, again, that can get messed up, so I don't want you to go by that by litmus, but I want you to understand the difference between tummy cramp and tummy rumble, and gosh, that cookie would be a good idea, because they are vastly different, okay? So one is caused by actual physical stuff going on inside of our body. The other one potentially is caused by bacteria. Yes, as uncomfortable as that sounds, that is true. Okay, so bacteria can definitely produce dopamine and serotonin. There is a difference that we can sense. We can actually feel a difference between a physical need for food and a craving, okay? So cravings are interesting, and now is where we cross the rocky bridge into addiction. because addicts crave. Yes, indeed, if you've ever tried the magical cocaine, I did that at one time. I developed quite the physical dependency on cocaine, and I would crave cocaine. I mean, I would think about it. I would think about the good things that were going to happen to me when I had it. I would think about how all the girls I would meet or the money I would make or, all these wonderful things, dopamine hits associated with doing that drug. If you are an addict, and a recovering addict, you've certainly been trained, on the phenomenon of craving and all those kinds of words. If you're not familiar with addiction, I would encourage you to just, do your own research on what a craving is. But a craving indicates addiction, all right? So you don't crave things you're not addicted to. You only crave things that you are addicted to. Sadly, I know, sadly. You ever crave that donut? That cereal? Yeah. So cravings indicate addiction. Now, you're going to immediately say to yourself, nah, Chip, you're wrong. Food's different because I'll die if I don't eat. So I got to eat, so I'm going to crave. You don't got to eat. You don't got to eat. You think you have to eat now? You think you have to eat in the next 5 hours? You don't. 10 hours? You don't. 24 hours? You don't. Week? You don't. 2 weeks? You don't. 3 weeks? You don't. Month? Now we're getting a little close to the edge. 40 days, about 40 to 70 days, depending on the shape of your body, but about 40 days you can go without eating. Now give me all your addict objections to that statement, because that's what addicts do. What we do is we'll make excuses. Oh, Chip, you're wrong. Yeah, I'm different. I can't go 40 days without eating. I get hungry. My stomach rumbles, like you're saying. It was a tummy rumble. It wasn't a craving. It was a real tummy rumble. I can't go 40 days without food. No way. You can. You can. So it's just that simple. I mean, you can look it up. It's not that hard. It's obscured, which I think is interesting. Most stuff you could just look up and find. It's somewhat obscured, but you can find the data. You can look at the research for yourself. So again, you're not going to go hungry. If I don't eat that cookie right now, I'm not going to go hungry. I'm going to be fine. Even though my mind screams at me that I might go hungry. That cookie will taste so good. Guys, that's addiction. Ask a heroin addict. Ask a cigarette smoker. It's the same stuff. Cigarettes make me feel good. I need my cigarette to get up. I don't want to eat right now, so I'm going to smoke my cigarette. Yeah, and then all the excuses about the behavior. Oh, well, I'll quit later, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Again, you won't starve. So that's the biggest excuse to me that I use for myself is, well, I got to have that food or I'll starve. No, you won't. You can go 40 days without food. So what's going on here? So why all this craving? Now, I'll tell you another little secret about fasting, and I'll tell you why this is in a second. But if you just stop eating right now, so I'm going to stop eating right now, you're going to go through cravings and all kinds of hell for 24 to 48 hours that you'll have to overcome. And it's addiction. It's exactly addiction. You'll think the same things. Your mind will tell you the same things. You'll make excuses in the same way that addicts make excuses. But after 24 to 48 hours, something happens. Your body burns through all of the glucose that it has stored. It only takes 24 to 48 hours. And guess what? All of those cravings, all that noise, all that chatter goes away. You beat your addiction to food. And the physiological reason for that is that every single cell in our body will run on glucose. Okay? It's not preferred. It's sort of the emergency default diesel generator of a cell. So cells are, 50 times less efficient running on glucose than they are running on fat. 50 times, okay? So your cells will run on glucose. And again, we eat a lot of dietary sugars. Bacteria inside of us, the good bacteria inside of us, want to eat fiber. I would wager that you, because I don't crave fiber. I'm not out there craving that broccoli stalk. I crave sugar. I crave dietary sugar. Why? Is it because it's good for my body? Because my body needs it? No, it's horrible for my body. Again, it's less efficient for my cells. It's, they'll run on it, but it's like running on poo, like on garbage. But the bacteria love it. Bacteria run on glucose and run on dietary sugar. Bacteria can cause dopamine and serotonin to be generated to give you brain goodies for when you eat dietary sugars. And so the loop goes round and round and round and round. How many excuses are you making right now? I love this. How uncomfortable do you feel right now? You should feel uncomfortable, because this flies in the face of everything that we've been taught, okay? But we're addicted to our food, and in particular, we're addicted to dietary sugar. What do we need to eat? Just saturated, mono-unsaturated, and poly-unsaturated fats, and a little bit of fiber if we get our ratios wrong, and maybe some chlorophyll. That's it. That's it. That is all. Does your body crave that? That's what you need. That's what we should crave. If craving is an important signal, then we should be craving fat, nuts, beans, and we should be craving broccoli and kale and, strawberries and blueberries. Not sugar. Not sugar. Not sugar. Okay? Alrighty. So let's talk a little bit about this. So here's a good article, oh, by the way. So, again, 43 to 70 days without food. Now, I want to talk to you guys about a bear, because a bear controls his behavior, and a bear is able to basically determine when they start putting on fats. So a bear doesn't eat much right off the bat. So like a grizzly bear will forage, and they call, when they eat, foraging for only about 2 hours during the day through the spring and summer. So what does that mean? A bear only eats for 2 hours during the day, during the spring and summer. During the fall, a bear will forage 20 hours a day. So a bear is eating all the time. Now, eating all the time for us could mean just eating every 5 hours. So if you eat every 5 hours, your body thinks you're eating all the time, and you will go into a state called hyperphagia. In hyperphagia, you're producing a lot of cholesterol. Cancers like hyperphagia. You're pretty much running on glucose, going back to what we were just talking about, and you're storing fats. So you're building fat tissue like a bear would during the fall. And, again, if you stay in that state too long, you're going to be obese. If a bear stayed in that state too long, a bear would get metabolic syndrome, a bear would have heart disease, a bear would have diabetes, just like we do, but a bear fasts, right? So a bear cuts all that fat down. But the point of that is a bear controls basically that fat tissue, and a bear does that by his diet or her diet and behavior. So that's super duper important, and it gives us a sense that we can control this, right? So we can kind of control our addiction to food and the consequences that come from our addiction to food, and in particular our addiction to sugar. Now I want to kind of drill home this point about fats again, and the importance of fats, and I want to make some points here. So Again, this gets a little sciencey, so I apologize for that. But if you are a scientist or a physician, you'll appreciate this. And in your small intestine, you absorb fats. So first of all, you can think of your intestine or your small intestine as just kind of your surface skin turned inside out, okay? So that's exactly what it is, really. But it has villi, so it has like hairs, and these hairs kind of go down, and they're able to pick up nutrients and do things, right? So, and in particular, you have a special section of your small intestine called, or these guys in there called lacteals. And lacteals are responsible for picking up and pulling up dietary fats, okay? So super duper important. They pull up dietary fats. It's the lacteals are where you begin to build chylomicrons, and those are the guys that carry cholesterol. So your cholesterol and your dietary fat situation, cholesterol is super important. It's how you, like if you're an athlete, you know, if you're constantly tearing down your muscles, how do you rebuild them? Cholesterol. Cholesterol is an anabolic steroid. So cholesterol and the breakdowns of cholesterol are where all anabolic and catabolic steroids come from. But when we're in a fasting state, when we're, let's say when we've just eaten a meal, we're making cholesterol. 5 hours after we eat a meal, we'll stop making cholesterol. So it's exactly like taking a statin drug. But anyway, I want to point out the importance of these lacteals. Again, these are lymphatic things, and they're, you know, kind of associated with blood. And this is a lymphatic entry. For the most part, your lymphatic system is kind of like our sewer system. It's our waste management system. It's how we get rid of stuff. But in this instance, this is how we input into our bloodstream cholesterol and fatty acids, which is really cool. But we do it through lacteals in our small intestine. Super important what happens there. And again, all I'm doing is just pulling up a graphic of actually what happens. So these villi that look like hairs, they're able to pull in dietary lipids through an enzyme process. Those dietary lipids really get broken down into their individual fats and sugars, and you do a variety of things with those fats and sugars. You build endocannabinoids, believe it or not, through this process right there. And you do that through every kind of fat you could stick on a triglyceride. There's 9 different types of endocannabinoids. Only one of them is water soluble, which is really interesting. Wanted to show you this slide. And again, what I'm showing here is this is from a study, but it's a slide that talks about neurodegeneration and the importance of basically proper energy in mitochondria. But when we have this is also showing something called glucose hypometabolism. Now, when we have too much glucose metabolism, a lot of bad things happen. And again, this happens if you eat more than 5 hours, you have too much glucose hypometabolism. If you eat a lot of dietary sugars, you have too much. You have glucose hypometabolism. You basically are processing too much glucose, and your body never gets out of this state, you know, a fed state. And that's just not a good situation to be in. And again, well, that's a worse situation for bacteria too, again, because they love sugar, right? So they love to grow in sugar. Our good bacteria want to grow in starch, not sugar. But what happens 48 hours after we stop eating is we'll burn through, and it takes up to 40 hours, we burn through all of our glucose. And when that happens, we start running all of our, let's say, organs that want to run on water-soluble things, we start running them on ketones rather than glucose. So we start running our brain on ketones, we start running our liver, we start running our kidneys. The things that like water-soluble fuel, we start running on ketones versus glucose. This has an immediate and impactful positive effect on any kind of neurodegenerative disease. I'm just starting to really socialize this idea with the autism families that I work with about fasting. Autistic kiddos, man, they eat a lot of dietary sugar. They have a lot of bacteria. And for them, that bacteria is useful. That bacteria literally builds them an alternative immune system. It's why they don't get sick like other kids. It's why they never get cancer. They have a kind of an advanced in a way immune system, but it messes up their neuro. It messes up their mental and cognitive abilities, just the short chain fatty acids that they make. But when you fast, again, this situation starts to right itself. So you start becoming back into a more restored metabolism, and you start really running the organs that want to run on water solubles, you start running those on ketones rather than glucose. But it takes 24 to 48 hours for kind of all these pollutants, I guess, to get out of us. And the reason that I talk about this, I'm so like big on fasting, is we're killing ourselves. I mean, and I don't mean go, don't eat for 30 days or whatever. You need to prepare yourself to do that if you're going to do that. But intermittent fasting is something that we can all do, and it's very easy. It's, eat 1 to 2 meals a day, and in between, just don't do anything but drink water. And you can put some lemon in your water or stevia in your water, things like that. Now, again, are there benefits to fasting beyond what I'm talking about? Absolutely there are. And I find it fascinating that it doesn't really matter the religion. Choose one. Choose your paradigm. Every single religion will talk about fasting, which just tells me that there's higher truths there. There's truths about fasting that transcend religion, is what I'm telling you. So certainly if you're a Christian, there's a lot about fasting in the Christian religion. And I would encourage you to read about that, because again, that is telling you how to nurture not only your body, but your soul. That's Dr. Mindy. We're not going to talk about her. So I'll kind of leave it here with this idea of a spiritual crossover for fasting. But in my mind, and again, I'll just give you my paradigm that you guys, will believe as you believe. But in my paradigm, we're two things in this reality. So we're a physical canister. So what you see of Chip here, and Chip talking to you. But I'm a physical vehicle here, right? So I'm constructed logically, I work predictably, I work through this endocannabinoid system and other major systems, but I can describe how my vehicle works. Now, if I pollute, I'm a vehicle, so first thing. The second thing is I believe I'm a multidimensional spirit, incarnated into that vehicle. So I would call that a soul. I would call that the Christian version of a soul, what and who is incarnated inside this vehicle. But I'm two things in this physical reality. Now, I would think the goal would be to be as much spirit as I possibly can be in this physical reality. Well, in order to do that, I kind of have to have an uncorrupted vessel, don't I? If my vessel is sick and diseased, again, it's not a good house for light, or however you want to look at it. So if we want to become more spiritual, the best thing that we can do is improve our physical well-being, make our house a better place for a resident, because that's what we're doing. Arguably, these bacteria, they're certainly beneficial bacteria, but there's a lot of non-beneficial bacteria. Arguably, you fight a little war of good and evil every day inside of you. The bad bacteria require things, and they require glucose, dietary sugar. They are certainly capable of manipulating you into cravings. That's what they do. So hopefully we're getting a sense of how important it is. Where do the bacteria come from? They're a response to poor diet. Okay, the worse our diet is, the more bacteria we need. The better our diet is, the less bacteria we need, and the more manageable they are. Good bacteria like fiber, bad bacteria like sugar. I'll leave it there today, boys and girls. I hope you're enjoying Chip Talks. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me a question at chip@newpharma.com. Hit me up in the chats here on the Chip Talks on Facebook or on YouTube. We'll be doing a lot more of these. We're going to talk about pretty much every single disease state over time. Someone has suggested or asked for fibromyalgia, so we'll be doing that one pretty soon. We'll be doing other ones, kind of as time allows. We've done the big ones, so I wanted to kind of get autism out of the way, and I wanted to get cancer out of the way. So if you know people or have people who are afflicted with those, be sure and go back and listen to those chip talks. As always, go back and listen to podcast number 1. That is our model of human function. And again, we talk a lot about those topics and subjects in every one of these, but it's always good to go back and get that refresher. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next Friday, if not before, and look forward to it. Bye-bye.